You must understand, the empath does not break like the others. They do not scream, they do not fight. They do not declare war in loud proclamations. No, when the empath reaches the threshold, they vanish. And that, my friends, is where the narcissist's nightmare begins. This phenomenon, the quiet departure of the soul who once mirrored the narcissist's every wound, is not merely a psychological event. It is archetypal, it is alchemical. It is what I have long referred to as a psychic transformation, an eruption of the self from the prison of the persona. And when this happens, when the empath snaps, it is not rage that overtakes them, it is realization, a sacred, often painful recognition that they have been participating in a drama, not of their making, a theater of shadows. You see, the empath was not born merely to absorb. They were born to see, to feel, yes, but also to see into the soul of another. That gift, though divine in its origin, becomes a curse when placed in the hands of one who does not wish to be seen. The narcissist, that fragile god of mirrors, is terrified of being known. Their entire reality hinges on illusion. They survive on projection, on control, on distortion. They do not love. They possess. They do not connect. They conquer. And so when the empath, who has been slowly drowning in the narcissist's sea of falsehood, finally opens their eyes, something ancient awakens in them. I have seen this pattern countless times, in dreams, in case studies, in myths. The empath, often unaware of their own light, becomes entangled with the archetype of the wounded tyrant, the narcissist. This is no mere romance. This is an unconscious contract, a dance of opposites. The empath, the healer, believes they can soothe the inner chaos of the narcissist. They mistake sensitivity for medicine. They try to become the savior of someone who does not want to be saved, only obeyed. But here is where it becomes dangerous. The empath begins to abandon themselves in the name of compassion. They confuse boundaries with selfishness. They excuse manipulation as trauma. They justify cruelty as pain in disguise. And slowly, they forget who they are. They forget what they need. They forget the very essence of the self, the core from which all healing emerges. This forgetting is not benign. It is a kind of psychic death, a slow erosion of the spirit, and it manifests not only in psychological symptoms, depression, anxiety, exhaustion, but also in the body, in the dream life, in the quality of one's perception. The empath begins to feel like a ghost in their own life. They walk through rooms and no longer recognize their reflection. The mask of the persona becomes heavier by the day, but the soul has a limit. And when that moment comes, when the soul can no longer carry the weight of suppression, it does not ask permission to awaken. It simply rises, often through dreams, often through illness, often through a sudden, inexplicable surge of energy that says, no more. This is the snap, but it is not an explosion. It is an implosion. The empath does not lash out. They return inward. They reclaim their projection. They begin the descent into their own shadow, to retrieve the parts they gave away. The narcissist, of course, never sees it coming, because they never truly saw the empath to begin with. They saw a mirror, a tool, a source of validation. They believed the empath existed for them. They were drunk on their own illusion. So when the empath finally disappears energetically, emotionally, spiritually, it is as if a portal closes and suddenly the narcissist is left alone with what they most fear themselves. There is a reason the narcissist seeks the empath. It is not love, it is not connection, it is reflection. The narcissist sees in the empath what they buried long ago, the capacity to feel, to grieve, to suffer, to heal. The empath becomes a sacred wound they have long denied, but rather than face it, they exploit it. They bind the empath to their unhealed inner child and call it love, and the empath, conditioned by centuries of spiritual rhetoric that equates love with sacrifice, accepts this bondage as destiny. They endure, they forgive, they pray, and in doing so, they reinforce the narcissist's illusion that they are the center of the world, that their suffering is more important, that their wounds must be worshipped. But again, I tell you, the soul has a limit. The empath snaps not in hatred, but in awakening. It is the same movement I have described in the individuation process, a rupture in the psyche where the false self dissolves and the true self begins to emerge. It is not clean, it is not poetic, it is messy, terrifying, and sacred. The empath begins to see that their compassion was not always compassion, it was fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of conflict, fear of being unworthy unless they were useful. And so the journey begins, a spiral descent into the unconscious. The empath begins to retrieve the shadow they denied, the rage, the grief, the need for sovereignty. They stop rescuing, they start remembering. They reclaim the voice that once whispered no, but was always silenced by the need to be nice. It is here that a great reversal occurs. The empath, once dependent on the narcissist's approval, becomes immune to it. They see the pattern, they name the dynamic, they break the spell, and in that moment, the narcissist panics, not because they miss the empath, but because the supply is gone. The mirror has cracked. The illusion is dying. This moment is not just psychological, it is mythic. It is the Persephone who escapes the underworld. It is the goddess who remembers her power. It is the sacred return of the self from exile. And it is often accompanied by dreams of fire, of floods, of rebirth. The soul is cleansing itself of the false stories it was forced to live. And so I tell you, when the empath snaps, it is not a failure, it is a resurrection, a holy defiance, a silent revolution that shakes the very core of the narcissist's kingdom. And though the narcissist may scream, may plead, may project and manipulate and threaten, it no longer matters, because the empath has heard the truth, not from the narcissist, but from within. Let us pause here. I will continue in part 2 with the deeper symbolism of this transformation, the archetypes involved, the shadow integration that must follow, and what becomes of the empath once they cross the threshold of awakening. And so the empath walks away, not in fury, not in vengeance, but in revelation. Their steps may be quiet, yet the psychic rapture left behind echoes like thunder through the soul of the narcissist. You must understand, when a soul has lived too long in the temple of false sacrifice, his exit becomes divine protest. Now, let us delve deeper into what truly happens beneath the surface of this dynamic. The archetypal undercurrents, the mythological resonance, and the subtle transformation that stirs in the unconscious when the empath breaks the unspoken contract. We are no longer speaking merely of two individuals. We are speaking of ancient patterns, of gods and goddesses, forgotten, of wounds passed down through generations like sacred curses. The empath carries within them the archetype of the wounded healer, the one who must suffer in order to awaken the power to heal. But herein lies the trap, when the wounded healer does not yet know they are wounded. They attempt to rescue others to avoid facing their own fragmentation. And the narcissist, so skilled at weaving illusion, becomes the perfect canvas onto which the empath paints their unlived life. It is projection, yes, but projection in its most seductive form. The empath projects not their shadow, but their light. They pour their potential, their love, their longing to be whole into the narcissist's broken vessel, hoping that in healing them, they too shall be seen. But the narcissist is not a mirror of healing. They are a black hole of the unintegrated shadow. What the empath does not yet understand is that the narcissist does not want to be healed. They want to be admired. They want obedience, not intimacy, control, not connection. This dynamic creates a psychic split in the empath. The unconscious begins to murmur warnings through dreams of betrayal, of drowning, of endless corridors with no exit. These are not just dreams, they are symbols. The soul is speaking. The water in these visions often represents emotion unprocessed and overwhelming. The corridors, repetition, the cycle, the soul trapped in a pattern that mimics love but is rooted in trauma. Eventually, the empath begins to experience what I call the shadow revolt. This is not rebellion in the ordinary sense. It is the return of the exiled parts of the self-anger, desire, rage, truth. All the emotions that the empath learned were too much as a child. All the truths they buried to preserve peace. These forces do not return politely. They burst forth like volcanoes, long held dormant. And the empath, who has always identified with being good, kind, gentle, is terrified by their own capacity for fire. But I tell you, this fire is sacred. It is not destruction, it is purification. It is the soul reclaiming its boundaries, its right to exist, its divine fury at having been diminished. And it is in this moment that the empath finally realizes they were never here to be consumed by others' wounds. They were here to witness them, not to die within them. The narcissist, confronted with this fire, recoils. They will often accuse the empath of becoming someone else, of being cold, cruel, distant, But the truth is, the empath is not becoming someone else. They are becoming whole. They are integrating the split between the persona, the mask of kindness, and the shadow, the hidden truth, is dissolving. The empath is no longer playing the role of healer. They are becoming real. This process is not linear. It does not unfold with grace. Often, the empath will feel guilt, shame, even longing for the narcissist after leaving. Why? Because the narcissist did not just mirror pain. They mirrored the wounded child within the empath, the parts of them that felt invisible, unworthy, or unlovable unless they were needed. This inner child must be held, not judged. The empath must turn their compassion inward now to themselves, and this is the hardest part, to love oneself after years of abandonment, to forgive the self for participating in the illusion, to grieve not only the relationship, but the fantasy of who the narcissist could have been. The psychic bond does not break with logic, it breaks with truth. And truth must be felt in the body, not just known by the mind. This is why the empath often experiences fatigue, shaking, even sickness after leaving. The body is releasing what the soul has carried for far too long. In dreams, the symbols begin to shift. The empath may see bridges, thresholds, gates. They may dream of lions, serpents, sacred rivers. These are not random, they are initiations. The soul is guiding them back into the realm of the archetype, not as a prisoner, but as a sovereign. The lion, for example, often represents courage, the emergence of the authentic self. The serpent, transformation, the shedding of old skin. The river, flow, the restoration of inner life after stagnation. When I speak of these things, I do not speak as a mystic who has abandoned science. I speak as one who sees no boundary between psyche and symbol, between neuron and numinous, what you call healing. I call reintegration, what you call awakening. I call individuation the sacred journey from fragmentation to wholeness. The empath, once torn between needing love and fearing loss, begins to root themselves in something deeper, the self, not the ego, not the persona, but the silent, eternal center that has always whispered beneath the noise. The self does not beg to be loved. It is love. And from that place, the empath no longer enters relationships to be saved. They enter to share. Now the narcissist, still trapped in their labyrinth of grandiosity, may attempt to return. They may send messages laced with guilt or praise or regret, but make no mistake, this is not awakening. This is withdrawal, the loss of supply. The narcissist does not mourn the empath. They mourn the loss of control, of reflection, of power. And here, the empath must remember to re-enter the cycle is to betray the self. Forgiveness is possible. Compassion is noble. But reunion is not always sacred. Sometimes the holiest act of love is distance. This boundary is not cruelty. It is protection, not of the ego, but of the soul. The empath's light must now be directed inward, illuminating the caverns they once avoided, the wounds from childhood, the inherited beliefs about love and pain, the shadow of the healer, the one who gave to others what they never gave themselves. This is the alchemical phase of solutio, the dissolution of the false self, and it leads to the rebirth of the archetype, not as victim, but as mystic. The empath becomes the one who sees not only others, but themselves. They learn to speak their needs, not with apology, but with authority. They learn to sit in solitude without seeking rescue. They learn to love without losing themselves. And in doing so, they become dangerous. Not because they harm, but because they no longer participate in harm. The narcissist, if they ever do awaken, must begin their own journey. But the empath is no longer the guide. They have stepped out of the role. They are no longer the nurse in someone else's nightmare. They are now the sovereign in their own dream. This is a snap, not a break, but a breakthrough. Not the end, but the beginning of true consciousness. Let us pause once more. In part 3, I shall explore how this transformation echoes through the collective psyche, how it changes not only the individual but the entire psychic field, and how the empath, once healed, becomes not a rescuer but a mirror of truth. When the empath transcends the wound, the psychic reverberation does not end at the threshold of their own healing. No, something greater is stirred in the collective unconscious. You must not underestimate the archetypal potency of such a rupture. What occurs within one's soul when they reclaim themselves from the jaws of narcissistic possession echoes outward like ripples across a sacred lake. It is not merely personal healing, it is mythic correction. I have long taught that the unconscious is not merely an individual phenomenon, it is collective. There is woven beneath the fabric of our daily perception a vast field of symbolic memory, of inherited meaning, of ancient patterns that each of us participates in. So when the empath awakens, they do not simply withdraw from an unhealthy relationship. They rise from an ancestral lineage of silenced mystics, unseen givers, and scapegoated visionaries. They rupture a generational contract that said, you must suffer so others can survive. This is not metaphor, this is psychogenealogical reality. The empath often carries the unprocessed wounds of the family system. They become the emotional sponge, the psychic lightning rod, the one who intuits what others refuse to name. As children, they learn to read the room. Before they learn to read a book, they survive by attuning to danger, to silence, to unspoken needs. And when they meet the narcissist later in life, it is not coincidence, it is recurrence. The narcissist embodies the very shadow. The empath grew up with emotional neglect cloaked in authority, manipulation disguised as love. And yet this meeting, however painful, is not a punishment. It is a summons, for within the torment lies the initiation. The narcissist becomes the unknowing priest of the empath's awakening, delivering them through suffering to the altar of the self. It is only through being consumed that the empath remembers their hunger. It is only through invisibility that they reclaim their face. You ask, What becomes of such an empath after the snap? Do they trust again? Do they love again? Yes, but differently. They no longer seek to merge, they seek to meet. They no longer give to be needed, they give to be known. The frequency of their soul shifts where once they attracted those who required rescue, they now attract those who reflect resonance. Equals mirrors, not voids. This shift cannot be faked. It is not a matter of affirmations or declarations. It is an energetic reality born of deep inner reconstitution. You see, the empath, once fragmented into archetypal polarities, victim, martyr, savior, has retrieved those lost pieces. They have integrated, they have danced with their rage and not been consumed. They have sat with their fear and not fled. They have loved themselves without demand. In the language of alchemy, this is the stage of conjunctio, the sacred marriage. Not with another, but within the masculine and feminine energies, once split and externalized, now harmonize inside the psyche. The need to be completed dissolves, and from this inner union, the empath no longer walks the earth as a seeker, but as a source. But let us return for a moment to the narcissist, what becomes of them in this equation. You must understand, the narcissist is not evil. They are wounded, they are frozen in the trauma of a fractured ego. A child who learned that the only way to survive was to dominate, to control, to deny vulnerability. But do not mistake this understanding for an invitation to return. Healing the narcissist is not the empath's task. The empath's task is to withdraw the projection, to reclaim the part of themselves that believed love must hurt to be real. If the narcissist ever embarks on their own healing, it must come through their own confrontation with emptiness. And most never do, because to awaken from narcissism is to face a death, the death of the false self, the persona constructed to protect the inner void. Few are willing to walk through that fire. And so they seek new mirrors, new empaths, new reflections to keep the illusion alive. This is why it is so vital for the empath, once awakened, to speak, not necessarily to the narcissist, but to the world, to share what they have seen, not as vengeance, but as liberation. There are others still sleeping, still giving, still dying within the wrong story. And the empath, reborn, becomes a torchbearer. They begin to speak in symbols, to paint, to write, to teach. They become healers, not by title, but by presence. Their words carry weight because they have bled. Their eyes see truth because they have cried in darkness. They are no longer obsessed with being liked. They are devoted to being real. I have seen this evolution many times in patience, in dream work, in the myths of old. The empath becomes the mystic, the trauma survivor becomes the seer, the silenced child becomes the oracle, and the world, so long addicted to domination, begins to tremble, not in fear, but in recognition. For the return of the empath's voice is the return of Eros, the sacred thread of relatedness that the narcissistic world forgot. And what does this mean for us all? It means we must re-examine the narratives we were given about love. about giving, about sacrifice. It means we must challenge the culture that rewards exploitation and silences intuition. It means we must teach our children that boundaries are not walls, but bridges to truth. The empath who snaps is not broken. They are reclaimed. They no longer fit the mold. They no longer shrink to be digestible. They become paradox, soft and fierce, kind and firm, open and discerning. And this paradox is precisely what our age requires, for the narcissistic structure of society cannot be dismantled by more obedience. It must be dissolved by authenticity. When the empath snaps, they cease to play the game. And in doing so, they change the rules. And yes, it is lonely at first. To wake up from illusion is to grieve. The empath must mourn the version of themselves that stayed small to feel safe. They must mourn the people who only loved the unawakened version of them. They must mourn the story that said their worth was found in suffering. But after the mourning comes the clarity, the stillness, the sacred pause, where the soul breathes again. The colors return, the body softens, and they find that they are not empty. Without the narcissist, they are free. And freedom, my friend, is not the absence of pain, it is the presence of truth. Let us pause again. And now we enter the final chamber of this transformation, the part no one sees, because by the time the empath has walked through the fire, they are no longer explaining themselves. They are no longer asking to be understood. They are no longer waiting for the world to catch up. The empath has become sovereign. Sovereignty is not dominance. It is not power over another. It is a full reclamation of one's psychic center. It is the return to the self, not the small, egoic self that pleads and performs, but the great self that witnesses, integrates and creates. And once the empaths roots themselves in that self, they become immovable, not hard, but grounded, not unreachable, but no longer penetrable by manipulation. At this point, they no longer define themselves in opposition to the narcissist. Their identity is no longer the one who survived or the one who escaped. That is only the middle chapter. The empath now becomes something far more mysterious. The one who sees, truly sees, without needing to fix, absorb, or defend. This vision is born from shadow. You see, the empath's journey is not about erasing pain. It is about integrating it. This is the most terrifying thing for someone who was trained to please, to turn and face the monster within the rage. The selfishness, the jealousy, the need for control, and to hold it with compassion, not shame. What we call the shadow is not evil. It is rejected life. It is the soul's suppressed expression, wrapped in fear. When the empath finally dares to feel their anger, to name their grief, to honor their needs, they begin to metabolize the shadow. And what once felt dangerous now feels holy. The split inside begins to mend. The psychic pressure loosens. The narcissist is a teacher of the shadow, but only if the empath stops dancing to that tune. Until then, the empath is trapped in projection, confusing external chaos for internal truth. But when the empath finally says, no more, and begins to ask, Why was I drawn to this in the first place? That is when the archetypal work begins, the mirror turns inward, and what do they find? They find the child, the silent, sensitive, watchful child, the one who learned that love meant sacrifice. That attention had to be earned. That existing came with conditions, and when the empath holds that child, not as a problem but as a beloved, something miraculous happens. The past begins to release its grip. This is deep psychic repair, the kind that cannot be forced through intellect. It comes through presence, through slowness, through breath and silence and unlearning. It is the reparenting of the soul, the reweaving of trust within the self, and with every small act of self-honoring rest, boundary, expression, the empath carves new grooves in the psyche, grooves of safety, of inner companionship. Now, relationships become mirrors, not crutches. The empath no longer looks for completion in others. They look for resonance. They can sit across from another and feel the pull of old patterns, but instead of falling into them, they witness them. They say quietly, here is the part of me that once needed this chaos to feel alive. And then they choose differently. This is mastery. It is not perfection. It is not invulnerability. It is awareness. And awareness creates choice. And what of love? What becomes of love? Once the empath stops confusing it with suffering, love transforms. It softens without surrendering the self. It listens without absorbing pain. It gives without needing to disappear. It receives without guilt. It grows roots not in fantasy, but in shared truth. Love becomes not a story the empath clings to, but the practice they embody, and because they are no longer fragmented, the empath's love is no longer a signal flare to the broken. It is an invitation to the whole. Their frequency changes. They may still feel deeply, yes, but they are no longer defined by emotional overexertion. They are defined by clarity, by presence, by sacred restraint. The narcissist, if they still watch from afar, cannot understand this transformation. The empath no longer responds, no longer defends, no longer entertains the performance. The narcissist cannot seduce what has become sovereign. They cannot bait what has left the game. And so they move on to seek the next unawakened mirror. But the empath, now mystic, walks a different path. They walk with others who know how to see. They no longer fear being alone because they have become intimate with themselves. They no longer seek chaos for excitement because peace no longer feels like boredom. They no longer accept breadcrumbs because they remember now they are the feast. This is not arrogance. This is return, a return to original essence, a return to truth, a return to sacred vision. And what of their gift? The empath's gift has always been sensitivity, intuition, resonance. But before awakening, that gift was outwardly directed, used to decode others, to please others, to heal others who never asked to be healed. After the awakening, that gift is no longer leaked. It is channeled, it becomes art, teaching, holding space for truth. without rescuing lies. The empath becomes the wise one in the village, not because they speak loudly, but because they know when silence holds more power than speech. Not because they control, but because they see. Not because they save, but because their presence reminds others they are already whole. They become dangerous in the best way, unshakable. They become mysterious in the deepest way, unhooked from drama. They become magnetic in the truest way, not because they try, but because they are. And I must remind you, this is not a destination, it is a spiral. The work continues. The shadow still rises. Old wounds still whisper. But now, the empath knows how to listen without obeying, to feel without losing center, to hold pain without becoming it. And that, my friend, is the difference between before and after. Before the empath lived in reaction, after the empath lives in response, before they gave to survive, after they give from overflow, before they fear being too much, after they are no longer apologizing for their existence. This is the birth of the spiritual warrior, not the one who fights with force, but the one who stands in truth, the one who knows that the real battle is always within, and the real victory is always wholeness. So, I say again, when the empath snaps, the narcissist may never see it coming, but the soul always did. The soul knew it would lead here to the end of pretending, to the collapse of illusion, to the emergence of the real. And from here, the empath no longer walks with wounds. They walk with wisdom. They no longer seek light, they radiate it. They no longer beg to be chosen, they choose themselves. They become, finally, what they were always destined to be. Not saviors, but mirrors of the sacred. Let us now descend one last time into the deep stillness where all illusions are stripped away, not in violence, but in reverence. What remains after the empath snaps is not ruin, but a renewal, a silence, not of emptiness, but of completion, a quietude so rich it hums with a memory of everything that has been seen, felt, endured, and finally understood. You see, the empath snapping is not a collapse. It is a culmination. It is the convergence of every ignored instinct, every silenced boundary, every sacred. No, that was swallowed in the name of peace. But now, peace is no longer the absence of conflict. It is the presence of selfhood. It is the full return of the empath to their own body, their own breath, their own knowing. There is, in this emergence, a kind of holy gravity. Others feel it. Those who once sought to control the empath now hesitate, unsure why their familiar tactics no longer work. There is nothing to pull on, no hook, no wound left exposed. The energy has changed. The empath is no longer signaling availability for pain. They are emitting the frequency of truth. This is the deeper meaning of individuation. Not simply to know oneself, but to become that knowledge in form, to let every choice, every word, every silence be infused with inner alignment. There is no need to explain, no need to prove. The empath field speaks for them, and yet this transformation is not without its cost. For to awaken is to lose what once felt like life itself, the fantasy, the illusion of fixing the narcissist, the illusion of being loved for one's giving, the illusion of earning safety by erasing oneself. These illusions are not simply beliefs, they are identities. They are who the empaths thought they had to be to survive. To shed them is to grieve, and grief, my friends, is not weakness. It is initiation. It is the soul's way of honoring what was, even as it releases what no longer serves. The empath, who allows this grief to move through them, becomes translucent, not see-through, but deeply seen. They carry no masks, only layers of meaning. They become a living symbol of transformation. And this symbol is needed more than ever, for we live in a time where narcissism is not merely a personal pathology, it is a cultural epidemic. We are surrounded by systems that reward performance over presence, domination over connection, consumption over intimacy. And in such a world, the empath's awakening becomes an act of resistance. To feel deeply in a numb world is rebellion. To speak truth in a manipulative world is revolution. To refuse to play the game is liberation. But this path is not for the faint of heart. It requires solitude, integrity, the courage to sit in discomfort without numbing it away. It is easier to fall back asleep, to return to the known, to reach for another narcissist, another savior, another story that promises love in exchange for self-erasure. But the awakened empath no longer trades freedom for familiarity. They no longer mistake intensity for intimacy. They no longer call chaos chemistry. They wait, they observe, they choose, and when they love, it is not to fill a void, it is to share a presence. And what of the world? Does the world change when one empath awakens? Yes, always, because every healed empath becomes a lighthouse. Not the kind that rescues every passing ship, but the kind that shines regardless, the kind that reminds others of the shore within themselves. And in this way, healing spreads not through evangelism, but through embodiment. The empath, once drained by the world, now energizes it. The one who once gave everything to everyone now becomes a portal through which love flows naturally, effortlessly, because they are no longer trying. They are being, they know now that love without truth is not love, it is control. That giving without boundaries is not generosity, it is self-abandonment. That empathy without discernment is not virtue. It is vulnerability to manipulation, and so they refine, they clarify, they become sharp, not as weapons, but as instruments of precision. They know when to open and when to close, when to speak and when to vanish. Their presence is a prayer, and their absence is a message. The narcissist, should they ever awaken, will remember them not as supply, but as a mirror they were too afraid to look into, a reflection of what was possible had they dared to feel. But the empath does not wait for this recognition. They have long since turned inward. They walk now with the archetypes not chained to them, but crowned by them. They walk with Artemis, sovereign and wild. They walk with Hermes, messenger of the unconscious. They walk with Hestia, keeper of the sacred inner flame. They walk with Christ, not as martyr, but as embodiment of compassion with boundaries. They walk with the serpent not as deceiver, but as the sacred coil of transformation that sheds what no longer serves. They walk with their own soul, finally. And so if you are listening to this and you feel yourself in this story, I say this to you: you are not broken. You are birthing. You are not too much. You are more than the world has learned to hold. You are not weak for feeling. You are courageous for still being open, and you are not here to save them. You are here to remember you. So sit, breathe, feel, let the ghosts rise and speak their peace. Let the old versions of you fall away like ash. Let the truth of your being, quiet and steady, emerge from beneath the wreckage. You do not need to become anything more. You need only return to the place where your knowing lives. Return to the self that has never left. Return to the sacred pulse within that does not beg or plead, but simply is. This, my beloved empath, is the final step. Not revenge, not validation, but embodiment. Let the narcissist wonder where you went. Let the past echo its last cries into the wind. You are no longer theirs. You never were. You are the mirror they could not shatter. You are the truth they could not bend. You are the light they could not dim. And now, finally, you are your own. So go as the awakened one. Go as a quiet storm. Go as the sacred rebel. Go as the one who no longer snaps. Because you see, because you know, because you are, and you are free.